Hi, this is Pat Moorhead, and we are back for another 6.5 Insider Edition, where we chat with the most influential executives at the most important tech companies out there. Dan, I love these insider segments. They are absolutely my favorite.
Yeah, definitely like talking to these people because they have the insights, they know the industry, what's going on. And of course, you and I always try to get underneath a little bit of what's not available out there publicly. And of course, we sometimes succeed, and oftentimes we get the same. We get the Heisman, but at the same time, I do love this format because getting a little deeper than what typical media, news, broadcast, interviews can ever do, and helping the market really understand what these companies are doing. It's so important.
It is, and one of my favorite topics, not from being in the semiconductor market, as an executive for 11 years and being kind of a consumer, a buyer of semiconductors for another decade, we no longer have to convince anybody that semiconductors are awesome. Like, people know them, right? They see new applications at companies, even to the end user, kind of changing the way on the planet. And then there's that little supply chain blip that we had where we weren't able to ship cars because of a 12-cent analog piece of equipment. But anyways.
Well, they just don't have radios in them.
That's right. That's right. They did not. But hey, without further ado, I want to introduce Ram. Ram, how are you?
Outstanding. How are you guys?
Great.
Thank you for having me.
First time on the 6.5. We're so excited to have you on, and you've got such a storied background, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you. You're being kind.
So Ron, before I dig into the very first question, because it's an insider edition and we have a little bit more time with you, just give a quick kind of synopsis of you, your role, and kind of how you got to Broadcom.
Yeah, so I run the switching and routing business unit inside Broadcom. I've been in almost all my career that was worth anything has always been in networking. I started in 2000, just about the .com bubble crash at Cisco, is a networking company. Been there for about 12 years, and after that moved to Broadcom. When I joined Broadcom, I thought, I'll probably be here for 4 years. Why would a guy from a systems industry be in the semiconductor industry? And then the next thing I know, it's almost 11 plus years at Broadcom. So that's me.
So let's talk M&A and Broadcom and kind of its background. So the company is well known for M&A.
Yeah.
Right? When you see any interview about the company, about Hock Tan, it's the CEO he's a deal maker. He's and of course you have a pretty big deal that's going on potentially right now.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about, in 2015, the Avago acquisition, being part of that. What was that like?
Yeah, actually 2015, roughly, I think it was about May of 2015, I got a call from my then boss, who used to report to Broadcom CEO, and he said, dude, can you go to Europe? I'm supposed to go meet this customer, but I need you to go. I was like, the last time also you bailed on this customer. So you want me to go again and cover up for you? He's like, yeah, just go. I'm like, okay, I went in and then I covered for the customer. They're like, where's your boss? I'm like, I'm here, let's talk about me. And then, towards the end of the day, we see the news that, Broadcom was being acquired by Avago. So for those who don't know it, we were acquired by a company called Avago,
right.
But they kept the name Broadcom for two reasons. One, our chairman, then and chairman now, Henry, wanted to keep Broadcom as a name. And what I understood was, he offered Hock a discount if he kept the Broadcom name instead of Avago, and then Hock being Hock, he took the discount and kept the name.
What a story.
So,
oh my God, this is great. I have never heard this before. This is so good.
There's that behind the scenes we were looking for.
I know.
Exactly. So everything has a price. So so I was in Europe, and then I started to get texts from my team members saying what's going on with other more colorful words in there, right? Like, who's Avago? Why is Avago buying Broadcom? Because Broadcom was known to be a technology leader at that point. We were in the set-top box business, we were in networking business, we were in Wi-Fi. But like every company that's in the public market, at some point in time, there's a bunch of products which are extremely successful. And Wall Street's looking for you to continue to grow. And then you put a bunch of bets into new markets that may not necessarily materialize, or the amount of money you're spending on these new markets might actually not make economic sense.
Yeah.
And so Broadcom was doing some of those. We were kind of trying to go after the mobile application processors. We were trying to get into the, the 4G, 5G modem space, and so on and so forth. And we were pouring a lot of money into it, and really wasn't getting, much returns on it. But the other thing that was happening because of that was some of those businesses which otherwise were very successful, what you would call the core businesses, were getting starved for resources, right? Because you're all investing in what is going to be the new thing going forward, and you're getting started in the core businesses. So that kind of sets you up for a perfect, scenario where somebody comes in and says, look, you're going to get acquired, we can run this place far more efficiently. And that was kind of the thesis that, was presented to us by Avago, right, which is led by Hawk Dan. And so first thing when something like that happens is, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? I was like, okay, well, I have a job, I've been here for, 3 years now. And they're like, anyway, they fired me, I was going to leave the 4th year, so no big deal.
Right.
But you start to think through all of these things. But what I would tell you is, what people don't know is when people think about, Hawk or what Broadcom does as acquisitions is, they think of it as you've reduced R&D. The reality of what we end up doing is we look at businesses inside of a company and say, some are worth investing in and investing a lot more in.
Right.
Some we will never be successful in this space, and it's probably best to divest out of it so that we can actually invest in the businesses that are worth investing in. So back then when we got acquired, my team was about 1,300 people, and we were investing a couple of $100 million in R&D. I would say now you look forward, 7 years later, roughly the same number of people, but we've doubled the amount of R&D. So then you say, okay, same number of people, doubled the amount of R&D, where's the money going?
Right.
The money is actually going back to the team members. But make sure that they participate in the overall success of the organization and the products that we put out there, and hire the best out there, right? So I would say, more likely than not, if not for the acquisition, I probably would not still be at Broadcom, but in terms of what the acquisition did for us in being able to invest in the team and actually invest in the products that we're actually doing well with, it's been an outstanding run.
Yeah, but it's interesting. There's always lore about a company, and I'd heard the lore about Broadcom and how you pay folks. So it's great to kind of hear that directly from somebody who has worked there forever. So you obviously have your own organic innovation. You acquire, and like you said, you go in and you look at, hey, what are some of the best bets that we can double down on, we can triple down on. Can you talk about subsequent of when Avago was acquired?
Yeah.
What are some of the acquisitions that you did, and how did those integrations go? Like, what areas did you double down on?
Yeah, post Avago acquiring Broadcom, at the company level, we obviously acquired a few other companies. One was Brocade, right? Brocade was another classic example of Brocade was known for fiber channel business. Right. But then Brocade had itself acquired, Foundry to try to get into the IP Ethernet, side of the business, and then they acquired, I believe Ruckus to try to get into the wireless business.
Right.
And their fiber channel business was kind of, starving, right? So, post that, when you look at what happened with Brocade, we've kind of really, focused on how you make the fiber channel far better. But within my organization too, we've made acquisitions. These are much smaller, and you can either acquire companies for revenue, or you acquire companies for an IP, or you acquire companies for people.
Right.
Generally, what we have done inside my team is we've acquired companies for people. Great talent, and actually both of them were in Europe. One of them was 2 professors and 6 PhD students. They were doing very, very deep research into how do you make networks far more higher performance, especially in the context of machine learning and AI workloads, which have a very different traffic patterns. Another was a company that we acquired in Romania, about 100 engineers. It was a great talent.
Right.
So when you acquire these companies, the first thing you kind of think about is, what makes this acquisition successful? Mm-hmm. And for us, it was about 5 years later, can you look back and say the team is still there? Because you're really acquiring people, right? And if you lose all the people in 2 years, what have you done? Right. So I can say around now, the team that we acquired about 5 years ago, the leaders of the team, and almost everybody from the team is still with us. And actually, even the leaders have grown in the organization over the last 5 years. And the other one that I did with a couple of professors was about 6 months ago. Time will tell, how things will look. But the key is always, focus on what their motivations are, let them do what they're good at doing, don't come in their way. And our job is really trying to make sure that they have what it takes to be successful. And I think, time has shown, over a period of time that these people enjoy what they're doing, they've contributed meaningfully to the organization. And sometimes I go back and ask them, hey, would you have done this again? And
Right.
generally the answer is yes.
Right.
That's pretty good. But, you sort of took us a little through chronology. We talked a little bit about Brocade. We've now talked about Avago. I know CA was in there somewhere.
Yeah.
There's been a number of fairly large acquisitions. Of course, everybody's watching to see what happens with VMware. The portfolio is rounding out. Broadcom's definitely, its roots as a chip company is clearly changing. But what is sort of the recent, what are some of the recent innovations that sort of continue to build on that story, that it's not about spending less on R&D and it's not about slowing innovation, but that Broadcom really does have DNA of continuous innovation?
Yeah. One of the gentlemen I used to work for, he had this saying, he said, innovation has shelf life. And so, what he meant is, you can think a lot about innovation, but if you don't execute, it's worthless, right? And so I would say in Broadcom, especially in my team, we really, really focus on execution. And when you kind of think about execution, execution is in the context of eventually you have to get a product out. And when you're thinking about getting a product out, it is against a lot of the laws of physics. When you start to think about it, Moore's law is coming to an end as you go from 40 nanometer to 28 and 28 to 16. And now when you actually look from 16 to 7 to 5, you're not getting the transistor performance improvements, and the costs are going up, and you're not getting those power reductions, right? With the Moore's law actually starting to taper out, at the same time, on the other side, the amount of data that is being transferred, whether it's because of video being created or artificial intelligence actually shuffling a lot of data, that is not coming down. If you actually look at the petabytes of data that's either being created or going up, it's going up. So you look at this and say, on one side, there's diminishing returns on Moore's law. On the other side, there is a logarithmic growth, an exponential growth rather, on the demand side. So supply side's actually coming down, the demand side's kind of going up. So what do you do as somebody in between? You have to innovate because you're being kind of really, really pushed against two opposing forces. So a lot of what we focus on this innovation is, there's something that really drives my team, which is we believe in democratizing networking. And then the democratizing networking is, can we keep doubling the bandwidth every 18 to 24 months and lower the price, right? So a lot of the innovations that we do are in that context. So for example, predictably we come out doubling the bandwidth of our chips, going from 3 terabits to 6 terabits to 12, 25, 50 terabits, and the most recent chip that we've released is 50 terabits. So actually, I usually don't walk around. People walk around, like they say, with a chip on their shoulder, right? I'm like, yeah, this is a chip in my pocket.
Only chip executives pull out chips out of their pockets in the middle of videos.
I love it.
So if you think about it, this chip has 50 terabits of bandwidth. And I want to kind of put this in context. 10 years ago, if you were trying to get 1/4 of this, bandwidth, about 12 terabits, you would be paying $1 million.
Right.
And that thing would be consuming.
Well, and it would be an appliance, not
Oh,
a
actually,
chip.
no. It's not an appliance. It's probably a box this big.
Yeah.
Half of a rack height, and it would consume 20,000 watts of power. 20,000 watts of power, $1 million, at least list price. You guys would probably get an 80% discount, and you probably pay $200,000 for it. This now consumes less than 500 watts of power. Okay. And you can probably buy this with a box, surrounding it for less than $10,000. So talk about anti-inflation, going from $1 million list price to $10,000 list price, 20,000 watts of power to 500 watts of power. That's like a 99% reduction, right? So that's how we think about innovation. And this is a classic example of one that we just came out with a couple of months ago.
Hey Pat, what do I always say?
You probably want to touch it.
I do. I want to touch it.
You want to make sure I share.
Yeah.
We'll have to get a couple of still shots on that. But Pat, what do I always say about the deflationary value of technology?
No, particularly in this time, when people are looking at where do they invest their dollars, it's unlike 2008. Now, technology is deflationary, and if you can grow the top line or minimize the bottom as much to get kind of or make a customer experience stickier.
AI,
exactly.
Automation, analytics. How much more can we do with so much less?
That's right. So, Ram, I think that's a great example, going all the way from a rack rack system down to, now is that an ASIC?
Yeah, this is a standard product,
Okay.
a chip. And so basically what ends up happening is you can go to some place like Taiwan or someplace else and, essentially you'll get a, sheet metal and a power supply and a CPU that sits along with this. And that's about it. That's all you need. And then you need a network operating system that sits on top of it.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, it does take a village, right? And one of the good things about getting older is you learn, and hopefully you learn, and you gain perspective. And one thing that I appreciate about the semiconductor business is it can't happen without an ecosystem.
Exactly.
You were rattling off a couple elements of it: high-level operating system, low-level operating system, infrastructure partners. Everything has to connect. So I'm curious, how are you pushing the ecosystem to operate at or near your speed? Because you might be able to operate at a certain speed, but if your partners aren't moving and swimming in the same direction at the same speed, it makes growth of innovation harder.
Right. No, actually, you said it very well, right? It takes a village to make things happen, and especially so in the semiconductor space because, you could go buy a television at Best Buy, but you don't go buy this chip, at Best Buy, right? The chip by itself is worthless to most consumers. There is a whole, product that needs to be built around this, and that kind of requires an ecosystem. Another interesting, data point I would put out there is, the rough math that I do just tells me, for every dollar that we invest in R&D, there's probably about $6 to $8 that our partners would invest in this to eventually have a finished product that they take to the market, right? So it actually puts a burden on us when we think about it that way, because if you think about it, for every engineer that we have, that means roughly they have 6 to 8 engineers there. So if I am late to the product by a month on an unpredictable schedule, think about the inefficiency that I multiply out there in the marketplace with this whole bunch of engineers. It's like you're waiting for your plumber to show up and you decide that instead of driving to work, you're waiting at home and he doesn't show up.
Right.
You've lost your entire day. And think about that frustration times everybody that's working in that ecosystem. So before we push the ecosystem, we are extremely clear that having a predictable schedule is important, and we drive to a predictable schedule, right? But two, when we actually start to look at what we need to build based on what our customers are telling us and sometimes what we anticipate the customers will need, we go back and say, look, hey, whether it's TSMC or somebody else who's a fab, your process node is not scaling that much anymore.
Right.
So how do I go about and build it? Not long ago, when we built chips, they were half the size of this. And if you built a chip that was over 400 millimeters square, people would start to look at you saying, hey, something's wrong with you, right? But then now, unless I build a chip that is 800 millimeters square, that is almost the reticle size of what a large fab can support, we can't build the chips that we're building, which means we work very closely with our fab foundries to say, can you optimize your process so that even when you're building an 800 millimeter square chip, you actually have the yield that you need, right? Then you have to go to a packaging, company and say, can you build a package that is the size of this chip? And packaging companies, as you know, they've never really had enough money to be profitable, so they never really invested. And if they don't invest over a period of time, what happens is you go and you say, look, I need to build a big package.
And it always used to be a downstream thing. You do the design, you get the IP, and throw it over the wall to the packaging folks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of think about this whole thing and say, how do you go through every one of the supply chain partners and make sure the whole thing comes together? And I'll give you one other example in this domain. We put a chip out there, but if you don't have an operating system that runs on top of this, you eventually don't have a networking product that a web or a web scale or somebody else is able to consume. So we are actually now the largest contributor to an open source software called Sonic, which was actually started by Microsoft.
Yes.
Because Microsoft said, look, I don't want to necessarily have a closed operating system, which if it breaks down while my network is running, I have to call somebody else and they won't tell me where the problem is. Why don't I start my own operating system that's open source? We're the largest contributor to it, so that now an end customer can take a chip, go to Taiwan or some other place, get a white box built, and they can actually run Sonic on top of it and actually have a fully functional box. So that's how we just kind of think about the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I like the sort of the metaphor about the drive and kind of the, I think we call it the snowball effect.
Yep.
There was a movie called Sliding Doors, I still remember too, that how each time we get kind of thrown off in your life, how that chain of impacts of different things that happen down the stream. And in semiconductors, I think we've noticed that again. The supply chain shortage probably was the first time that the whole world really saw
exactly
what happens. But of course, there's vendor level issues too, where the supply chain could be okay, but someone along the way committed something at a certain point, and then all of a sudden the OEMs don't have the product, and then their enterprises don't have the product, and then the applications they're trying to build. So let's flip to the other side of this though. When Broadcom gets it right, you tend to be far up the stream. You tend to be building things that are needed for companies. What is the impact of that innovation? How does a company like Broadcom measure the impact as well?
Yeah, so I would actually go back to the impact of our innovation and the example that I gave you before. What used to cost $1 million and 20,000 watts of power now is less than $10,000 and 500 watts of power. And then you say, okay, fine, but what does that all mean? If you think about it today, and if you actually think about the evolution of computing, right? We went from clients to mainframes with your friend Greg, right? And then over
He'll be so happy by the way you mentioned
absolutely,
him.
and still some of the most important things in the world get done by mainframes and whatever Greg does to help them out. But then we went from there to PCs, and then eventually the whole idea of distributed computing started to take hold, and the people who pioneered those are people like Google and the others built very, very large data centers, and the applications were written so that they took advantage of this compute being spread out, right? And then Sun, if you think about it, 30 years ago coined the phrase, the network is a computer. And I actually didn't think about it for a long time, what it meant.
It's a digital equipment, yes.
Yeah, I never actually understood what it meant. But now when you think about it, all the applications you experience today, whether it is an Uber or a Google search or anything that comes from Meta's platforms or anything else, all of that is based on distributed computing. And the distributed computing, the essence of it is that any one computer cannot be big enough. So you have a whole bunch of computers, hundreds of thousands of those, and they're all connected by the network, right? And so we are the ones that are actually enabling this network happen, because it's like plumbing, right? You don't think about it till your plumbing stops working and then everything breaks loose, right? So that is what we do, which is like we have to continuously keep coming out with the bandwidth at a lower prices and lower power, so that the distributed computing, as you're experiencing in your digital life every day, is seamless. And that's the impact. And that's why I say Broadcom, most people don't know it, but we connect everything. You think about your phone, your Wi-Fi is a Broadcom chip in there. It connects to your access point, which is a Wi-Fi access point, which is very likely a Broadcom chip in there. Then it connects to an Ethernet port that leaves your home through your CPE device that a service provider drops off, likely a Broadcom device in there. From there it goes to service provider metro network, eventually to the data center and to the computer. We're connecting everything.
Yeah, I tell you, I look back and I was a major supplier of a hyperscaler when I was at that unnamed semiconductor company, and I remember, use the word democratize, and what you did to democratize networking at the hyperscalers was just amazing. And it used to be you would go in and quite frankly go through a very expensive network provider, and you shifted the model to an ODM model that literally changed everything out there. And networking is the only way to do distributed computing. Otherwise, everything would have to be in the same place. And the great news about the future is, you had mentioned this, and we've all sat through presentations of the explosion in data, but it is true. And it's data not only that's being created by businesses and consumers, but now by machines, right?
Yep.
And the requirement too for the low latency and high performance puts that extra added challenge. So Ram, you're going to be busy, you and your team, for a long, long time.
We like that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's all about going fast, like a 911 or a Cayman.
Exactly.
Right, Ram? Ram, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate having you.
Appreciate it.
All right, everyone, there you have it. The 6.5 Insider Edition is all wrapped up. We had Ram here from Broadcom. We talked a lot about M&A. We talked about innovation. Yeah. We talked about the challenges of when one part of a design gets broken, and we talked about how companies have to work through it. But Pat, I think for this show, it's time to say goodbye.
It's great. I love Insider's editions, especially when they're about semiconductors. So,
Anything about chips.
anyways, hit that subscribe button, and we really appreciate you coming in. Thanks, and have a great morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are on the planet.